Welcome to the Day About Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We do this session here, the Day About Friday, every Friday, to essentially allow you, the audience, to ask questions all about data vault, data-driven solutions, cloud computing, and so on. Massively parallel processing clusters, right? Yeah, you can, every question is allowed as long as it fits into this general topic, essentially. You can use a chat here. You can use the Q&A section here in the client. Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question in live, works for me. I'm used to that in the training. So people do ask questions live and I typically have an answer that I can give to them. So it's all good. You can also use a form, which I will show you after today's session, where you can essentially upload your question, upload some pictures if you want from a whiteboard, for example, or any other images, diagrams, which might end up here in the session, right? So don't overstretch it. And if you receive multiple questions, I'm going to cherry pick. So I'm cherry picking. So there's no guarantee that your question will be answered, essentially. It depends on the let's say, the type of question and how it fits into the session, essentially. And it's time boxed, typically 10, 15 minutes, including what I'm saying here all the time right now, right? So it's all included. And if there would be no questions at all, we will talk about the cluster. We did this once, at least, and I made some progress. I received a, so I'm lookout always on the hunt for new stuff. And I received a, from one of these, you know, these auction sites on the web, got a server with 8 CPUs. The old one, outdated, but it's real fun to play around with. So it's, I'm a nerd. So, all right. Okay, cool. But today, if you don't have a live question, I would talk about one of my favorite topics, actually. Let me just share the screen here. If I find the slide, there you go. Essentially, managed self-service BI again. And we talked about that in one of the previous sessions before. We talked about the user space already. We talked about the general architecture, the idea, the concept of that. Essentially, business users can build their own solutions essentially on your platform. And you're essentially for managing the infrastructure, the tools, you provide the integrated data and X meaning some standard reports essentially. And then in the extreme case, you could even limit yourself to just the platform, the tools, and then the integrated raw data, which means the raw data vault, that's it. And the business vault, the information, but you say, well, you know what, that's not my part. We don't do that here. You leave it to the business users, to them to do this by themselves. You provide them user spaces. And let me just quickly, yeah, let's just draw this up again. We have the source systems. We have the, and I create a logical diagram here, so with all the data lake, but we have some staging area. We have the raw data vault and the business vault, and then you have got these information marts. Those are your standard solutions, and you say, you know, we cut short here. This is what we provide, and that's it. Nothing more than that. And you leave it for the power users in the user space to build their own solutions, to build their own business logic with views, maybe with tables, maybe you help them, right? And with some user, as we call them, user marts inside their user space, hopefully a star schema, let's say that, okay? That's the basic idea. So you only focus on the raw data vault and that's it. Extreme case, you don't do this. I mean, in the end, you also provide some standard reports. But now when the users start building their own solutions in user space, and in the best case, you would see some raw data vault structures, hub-sync satellites in user space, but leave it. So typically you see everything but data vault, to be honest, in user space. But in the best case, and it's Scalefree, for example, if you look at my user space, you don't see any hub-sync satellites. It's really, I'm just using it for uploading some files, some CSV files, sometimes uploading them because I need some relational database, right? Because I know SQL, so I want to use it. And then when I'm done with massaging the data, I offload it and move it into the next application, essentially. So I use it a lot for data preparation, and that's how I use the user space. But then we have users like Mark, for example. He's another trainer at Scalefree, Mark Finger. He's actually building, or used to build when he had some time, he used to build internal solutions in the user space. And then and he really models data vault structures, hub-sync satellites in the user space. But then the problem is that when power users build these solutions, they typically don't, I mean, everybody wants to build these solutions, but to maintain them is a different story, because what if the source structures changes? What if there's runtime errors and so on, right? Or when there's a change to be made, it's cumbersome. And that's where they come to you, right? Here we built something, can you maintain it, please? That's when they think, that's when they start thinking about you again. And sorry for that. The idea, it turned off. The idea is, it looks like shining light, but it's just I'm not an angel. The thing is, they want to get rid of the solution, and that's where they start thinking of you. And or you start thinking of them because they're messing up the storage consumption, they're using a lot of storage. Maybe you can't even limit it. Or if you limit it, they come to you and say, well, you know what? We consumed all these, I don't know, 5 terabytes of data or 5 gigabytes of data, maybe better. We consumed those 5 gigabytes of data in Userspace, and now we get this error message from the database backend, no storage left or something. Can you please increase the storage or give us more CPU power, that kind of stuff? And in this case, I'm not sure if I would give them 5 gigabytes of extra storage. Maybe let's take a look at what they're doing and help them first, right? Instead of creating tables, you help them to virtualize the business logic, creates less redundant data, and consumes no storage. So that's number one. But you can also think about monitoring these user spaces. And we talked about that in one of the last sessions, monitoring these user spaces in order to proactively identify when users exceed some, let's say, thresholds. For example, because everything is on your platform, you can start looking for consumed storage and CPU power, sure, but also you can look at, for example, the number of grants or the number of users who query the system, the solutions. The thing is, sooner or later, the users hit some threshold. The user space is intended for small solutions where you don't have time to deliver something, or they don't have a budget. But if they, so it's intended for small teams, small settings. But if the CEO or some C-level manager or hundreds of users in your organization are using these solutions, the impact of the solution becomes too large. And the bigger the impact is for the organization, the sooner you should jump in and build a standard solution, essentially. Well, first of all, you want to monitor that. So there's a dashboard solution, the Metrics Vault and Metrics Smart typically for that, where you monitor some thresholds, how many grants they have on the solutions, how many individual users are using the solution, how many alter table and alter view statements they execute. Because here's the thing, you want to take the solution over when they exceed some of these thresholds. Too many grants, too many active users, too much storage, or low number of alter table statements, alter view statements. Why? Either the solution exceeds the intended organizational impact, so it becomes too big essentially, or the solution becomes stable. We use this in prototyping as well, when the users at the beginning, they don't know what to do with the data, but they have no clear business rule. They can't articulate the business rule yet. They need to play around with the data. So they start playing or prototyping some solution. And then what's the characteristic when they're done with playing around? Well, they will not execute alter table or alter view statements that much anymore, right? So the solution becomes stable over time. And that's when it's another good reason to take a look at what they've built, because now you can use what they've built. And the idea now is to move everything from the user space up here into the, well, not in raw data vault maybe, but well, both here and here in all these directions, to move the solution, the user space solution, into a standard solution, because the impact became too large. They consume too much storage, so we need to make it more efficient, and so on. All the reasons why you would do this. Well, it means you have to set up a project team for that, a sprint. You have to articulate what they want to build, some change request or information requirement, and they have to set up a budget for that. But because the impact is large enough now, it would justify a budget. And then your job is to turn this user space solution into a standard solution. And we call this process industrialization. So we use the user space. First of all, the red line. Let's extend it a bit. I mean, they can use everything from the raw data vault, from the business vault in information marts, where they have access to, according to the security guidelines, right? But your red line is here. You never use anything from the user space directly. So the user space for us doesn't exist. We just monitor it. That's it. Just because of different, let's say, quality deviations, they might not properly test. The documentation is low. It's not fully automated, maybe, and so on. So we never use something from the user space. And your job now during the industrialization is to move everything from the user space into the standard area, into the upper part that you manage, that you maintain, essentially. And for that, we review what they've built in the user space. I mean, you have everything. You have the code, you have the data, there might be processes available. You might have even scheduled their processes, right? What I would always do, their Python scripts, the R scripts, you took them over and you scheduled them, essentially. So you have everything. Now it's time to take a look at what they've built. Well, they didn't build Data Vault. They didn't build maybe proper code and so on. Not enough documentation. So your job is to turn everything into a standard solution based on Data Vault, assuming everything up here is Data Vault, right? That's what I assume. So you move everything into Data Vault. You extract the business logic. So you separate the business logic from the raw data into the business vault. And you build the information marts. Turn the user mart into an information mart. Produce the documentation, do all the testing, the deployment, and so on. You build a proper solution, but you use the user space as a basis for analysis, essentially. If they can't articulate what they've built, well, you see what they've built, right? That's the idea. And there's even tools that support that. So internally, we use some tools where our power users, they can build their solutions down here, not with SQL. They just do this in a graphical means, some graphical tools. And the tool, when you build the graphical process, you can build some documentation for it. And the documentation seriously reads as a, let's say, description for a SQL developer. Select from these two tables, join them, apply these transformations to the fields, and so on. If you just go through this documentation, a SQL developer knows what to do based on the documentation. The person knows how to turn this into a SQL statement in views, store procedures, and so on. That's the idea. And that's what we use, some tools that support the industrialization. We select these tools because they support the industrialization process, essentially. And your job is to do this on a frequent basis. It's not a one-time off. You monitor the user space for the next solutions to be industrialized. That's the idea, on an ongoing basis. I mean, in the end, in larger settings, you have hundreds of these solutions, hundreds of solutions in a user space, and you can only pick up a few, let's say 3 or 4 or 5 solutions in parallel or per sprint in a larger setting, right? Which means that you have to cherry pick the ones that consume most storage, burn most CPU power, have the biggest impact on the organization, and so on. Define your thresholds, define your prioritization, but that's how you identify these solutions to be industrialized, essentially. Or they come to you with a budget. That's the other choice. So, but that's the idea, essentially, how we manage the industrialization. Ongoing basis. You have a limited team. You can't do everything at once. So focus on the ones that hit the thresholds at the highest level, essentially. That's the idea. And that's where the monitoring solution with a metrics vault, metrics mart comes at high value, essentially. That's the biggest value for those concepts, because they're also complex to build, essentially. Yeah, that's, I think, more or less about your industrialization. It's not a question from the audience here. I mark my questions here, the ones I want to push a bit with a star, right? So this came from me, essentially, just to be open and fair. But it's one of my favorite topics. Why? Because business loves it. That's why I like it. So it really gives them value, really gives them some business value that they can work with. And yeah, that's why I prefer it, essentially. Cool. That's the industrialization process. Any questions on that from the audience? If you want to raise something, use the chat here, Q&A. Just raise your hand, right? Everything works. All right. So I don't see anything popping up. Yeah. Thanks for joining today. So if you have a question like this, let me just clean this up here. I had to steal the iPad from my kids. They were playing around with they were also actually painting on it. All right, if you have questions like this, or anything else around Data Vault, cloud computing, MPP systems, or systems with 8 CPUs, that kind of stuff, all this fancy, cool stuff, cloud computing, data-driven solutions in general. Use this form, sfr.ee/dvfriday. Gives you a form where you can type in your question and essentially upload some pictures if you want, some attachments, so we have some input, some fodder for the slides. That gives me some prep time to prepare the slides and then present them here. But you can also use live. You can share. You can raise your questions here live as well. Works well. Cool. The weather's heating up here I'm located in close to Hanover in Germany. Very sunny weather. We expect some storm and rain though, but let's see. So far it's good. So enjoy the weekend, guys. That's what I'm trying to say. And see you next Friday, hopefully. It's a growing group, so people come back and more. It's nice. Yes. Have a nice weekend. See you next Friday, same time, 11 o'clock Central European Standard Time. And enjoy the weekend. Thank you guys for joining. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.